Hi everyone, it's Carrie, and today I want to do something that I've never actually done on this channel before, and instead of diving into the plot of a book, I want to dive into an author's life, more specifically 10 days of that author's life. Today we're going to be talking about an unsolved mystery that has inspired countless books and films, and even a Doctor Who episode with arguably everyone's favorite doctor.
No one knows exactly what happened, she just vanished.
And that is the queen of crime and murder herself, Dame Agatha Christie. If you guys know me, you know that I love mysteries and thrillers, etc. This is a mystery in and of itself. From a very young age, I became obsessed with specifically the Joan Hickinson Miss Marple series. I don't know how I found them, but I ate them up, and that kind of sparked my absolute love of Agatha Christie. So when I heard about this kind of mysterious time in her life, I was very drawn to it, and I wanted to talk about it because it's odd and interesting, and it's my channel. So this story will touch on some darker themes though, so do check the description box for any trigger warnings. Let's just jump into who she is, where she started, and how we got to this point. So at the end of her very long career, she had published 66 crime novels, 14 short story collections, numerous very successful plays, and she even wrote 6 romance novels under a pseudonym, because we don't mix genres apparently. Even though her life was very extraordinary, her upbringing was pretty normal for a upper middle class British girl. She was born to a British mother and an American father, and she was the youngest of 3. Her siblings were so much older than her that she pretty much grew up by herself. She was homeschooled, and she has said many times that she pretty much had her pets and her imaginary friends, and that was it. But luckily at a very young age also, she started reading, to the point where at the age of 10 she was already writing poetry. So she picked up the pen early. But unfortunately at the age of 11 her father passed away, and from then on she kind of became the woman of the house. Her mom had failing health, kind of as one does in the 1800s, and so they started traveling. They went to warm places. So Agatha was going to Egypt, she was going to Spain, wherever like wealthy British people would go to be in the sun. Now she's in her 20s, she's a relatively outgoing person. She's always quoted saying that she hates crowds, but she seemed to be pretty social, so she liked going to little parties. And at one of these little parties was a man named Archie Christie. He was in like the Royal Air Division or something. He was charming, he was a soldier, blah blah blah. And they end up getting married in 1914. And this is kind of right when he gets whisked off to war. So they get married like in between whenever he's allowed to come home. And at this time, actually, Agatha volunteers to be a nurse. Kind of dark, but this is why some of her descriptions in her future work is so good, is because she was just surrounded by death and just the horrors of war. So she could kind of reflect on that and put it into writing. And 2 years later, in 1916, she wrote The Mysterious Affair at Styles. This was her first crime novel, and it was rejected pretty much by everyone until about 2-3 years later. Someone finally is like, we'll take it, but you have to change the ending a little bit. And it gets published in 1920. In the meantime, between her writing this and it getting published, she has her first and only child, a daughter named Rosalind. And this is a weird aside, but I really want to add this in. I found this during my research and it was so funny. So The Mysterious Affair at Styles was a blockbuster. It saw pretty much immediate success. And in the 1920s, there were always these like exhibitions, these kind of traveling shows where celebrities would go, etc. And she and her husband were invited on one. So in 1922, they left. They dropped Rosalind off at Agatha's mom, and they went to Africa and Australia and the Americas, etc. They went everywhere for 10 months. The interesting tidbit is that when they went to South Africa, they learned to surf. And then their next stop they went to Hawaii. And apparently, they were among the first ever Britons to surf standing up in Hawaii. And I just feel like you think you know everything about Agatha Christie, and then you find out she's one of the first Britons to surf. Like, I would never connect that. But there they are. So Archie and Agatha hanging 10 in Hawaii in the 1920s. So anyway, clearly she's kind of at the top of the world. She's doing great. But in 1926, her mother passes away. This is in April. Agatha was strongly shaken by this. Her mother was really her best friend. It was reported that apparently in August, friends and locals saw that she actually went to a completely different town. She was living in the countryside at this point, but she went to a completely different town to, quote, recuperate from a breakdown, because she was just thrown into this horrible depression. Also in August, literally, could you have worse timing, Archie? Archie lets Agatha know that he has a mistress that is about 12 years younger, and he wants a divorce. And this leads us to December 1926. So it is late in the evening of December 3rd, 1926, and Archie and Agatha are having a very loud argument. So clearly Agatha has not agreed to the divorce. The divorce is going nowhere. And Archie has just waltzed in to let Agatha know that he is going to be going on a weekend trip with his friends and that she's not invited and he'll see her later. And it is very clear to Agatha that these friends are his mistress, who he is still seeing. So they get in a pretty heated argument and Archie storms out. Agatha goes into the sitting room and she pretty much just kind of sits downstairs in the dark for a little bit. According to the staff, around 9 o'clock, she walks upstairs, kisses her now 7-year-old daughter, Rosalind, goodnight, and she tells the maid, I'm gonna head out and I'm not coming home tonight, so please watch after Rosalind. Bye. And she waltzes out, hops in the car, and speeds out into the night. Her car is found soon after, and it's about a half an hour drive from the Christie home. It is crashed into a chalk pit or a quarry. The headlights are still on. In the back seat, there is a small suitcase and a couple other things. Sources vary as far as what is actually in the car, but apparently there is like a coat, an expired license, and a small bottle labeled poison lead and opium. But I guess it's the 20s and that didn't ring any alarm bells. Like, I guess people just had poison on them at all times. Or maybe it was just an Agatha thing. I don't know. But anyway, that was not a red flag to them. Immediately upon looking at this scene, the authorities were like, this isn't good. First of all, there is a abandoned car dangling off of the road. So you don't need to be a genius to put that together. But this was also next to a body of water that is kind of an urban legend. So apparently in this town, they call this specific, it's either like a lake or a pond, they call it the Silent Pool. And legend has it that it is bottomless or something, and apparently there have been a lot of local children that have drowned there. It's just bad news to be near that pool. So immediately the authorities are like, something is wrong. Also, she's a celebrity, so we gotta be on this. Let's find Agatha. So this ends up becoming one of the biggest investigations ever at this time. So there ended up being anywhere from 10 to 15,000 human beings walking around, all these volunteers. There's the police force. And this is also one of the first investigations ever where they used airplanes to search for her. They had biplanes going around trying to locate her. They even went so far as to have a seance at the chalk pit to try and find out any information. And they even called 2 of the other very popular crime novelists at the time to come and kind of get in Agatha's brain. I think that they thought that crime novelists think alike. So they were like, hey guys, come help us out. One of them was Dorothy L. Sayers, who wrote the Lord Peter Wimsey novels. And another one you might recognize is Arthur Conan Doyle of the Sherlock Holmes series. Apparently Arthur and Agatha were actually, I don't know if they were friends, but they were definitely kind of friendly colleagues that often talked to each other and stuff. And so Arthur felt really strongly about finding Agatha. And one thing that I didn't know about him, I guess because I feel like Sherlock Holmes is often someone who is so logical and hates pseudoscience, Arthur Conan Doyle was big into the occult. To a point where he actually took one of Agatha's gloves and brought it to a clairvoyant to try and figure out where Agatha was. Didn't get anywhere, no clues. So apparently some of these objects signaled to the police the possibility that Agatha was in London and she was hiding out dressed as a man. I don't know where this came from, but they had Archie go into his closet and check if any of his clothes were missing. And the newspapers started to post pictures of what Agatha could look like in disguise. And it literally was just somebody put a pair of glasses on her. They were kind of grasping at anything at this point. And speaking of the newspapers, the press are eating this up because it's so meta. It was just perfect for tabloids. The fact that this author of mystery and murder has suddenly disappeared in a mysterious way. It was pandemonium to the point where on December 6th, this was front page news on the New York Times. It was front page news everywhere. But regardless of public interest, clues were very, very slow coming in until we get to the letters. So the police are notified that not only did Agatha talk to her maid or housekeeper right before she left, but she also happened to leave a couple of letters behind. The first one is to her secretary, which all sources pretty much say was just work stuff. Basically like, hey, can you cancel my meetings? I'm gonna be gone, which wasn't too suspicious. There was a source, however, according to the New York Times, that said within the letter she wrote, "I must get away. I can't stay in Sunnydale much longer." So that was the only mention of it, and this was an article from 1926, kind of in the heyday of it happening, and so it's very probable that that was a rumor that just kind of got slid in. So I'm basically just going to assume that it was work-related stuff. The next letter was to her darling husband, Archie, which I need to note, people didn't know about the affair at this point. This was still kept under wraps. So other than the people working in the house and maybe Agatha's friends, but I kind of doubt it based on her being such a private person, no one knew that he was a cheating husband. The husband is obviously going to be a prime suspect for a wife gone missing, but they didn't know that he had that extra sprinkle of like being a very good prime suspect. So anyway, darling Archie gets his letter, and apparently, of course, it is too personal, and so he burnt it. He did not let the police look at it. Nobody, to this day, no one knows what is in that letter that Agatha wrote to Archie, but it is burnt to a crisp almost immediately. The final confirmed letter is to her brother-in-law, which actually came in the mail, and it basically tells him that she is going to a spa in Yorkshire. And what's strange about this is that the letter is postmarked from London. So that means that somehow between the time of she crashes her car, somehow Agatha gets on a train to London and mails this letter and then disappears again. She could still be in London, she could be somewhere, apparently this spa in Yorkshire, nobody knows, but logistically, how did that work out? Like, did she walk? Did she hitchhike? Like, to this day, no one knows how to piece that one together. And for some reason, the police don't really care about the spa in Yorkshire thing. I think that they are just maybe spread too thin. Maybe there's a lot of spas in Yorkshire. I don't know, but they don't really follow that lead. And then there are 2 other letters that are simply rumors. So I don't think that they're too trustworthy, but I will let you know what they are. The first rumor is that there was a letter left to either her house staff or her secretary, it's vague, but this was basically a open this if you find my dead body letter. And if I come back alive, give it back to me kind of situation. So it was either, it could have been a will, it could have been something, I don't know. But that was a rumor that was kind of widespread in the 20s. And the second one was allegedly to the local constable, saying that she, quote, feared for her life. And this is one I only found a few sources mentioning that. So again, I think this was kind of just a rumor. So we're basically going to say that there were 3 letters: the secretary, the husband, and the brother-in-law. So again, the police for some reason aren't going too hard on this spa in Yorkshire clue. They're still stuck around the chalk pit as their only clue. And they go so far as to bring one of Christie's pets to the chalk quarry. And apparently, quote, it just whined pitifully. So they've got nothing. They've really got 0 to go on, and the world is watching. 10 days have passed, and like I said, this is front page news still. And so everyone is looking, everyone has seen Agatha's face. And on December 14th, an employee from the Swan Hydropathic Hotel, which is now called the Old Swan Hotel, in Yorkshire, he calls the police and he's like,
there's this really nice lady here. She's from South Africa. Her name's Teresa. And, she's doing her thing, having a great time, lovely guest. But she looks a hell of a lot like Agatha Christie. So do you want to come down here and check?
So the police are getting a lot of tips, but something about the fact that we have a visual confirmation and it is a spa in Yorkshire, they go check it out. I think it was super dramatic, and I think Agatha, had she actually been writing this, would have loved how this went down. Instead of going to the front desk of the hotel and being like, hey, can you call down Teresa Neal, this South African lady who is very nice and looks like my wife, they decided to just kind of lurk. And so Archie goes into the dining room, sits down at a corner booth, and waits. And Teresa walks in, takes her seat at the dining room table, fluffs open her newspaper to read it, and ironically, Agatha Christie is on the front page. And she just looks like a normal lady. She doesn't look necessarily depressed or stressed. She just looks like a socialite that came down to read her paper. But Archie is like, that is my wife. And he decides to now approach her once he has physically seen her. So apparently Archie goes up and he's like, Agatha, hey girl. And she looks confused. All witnesses pretty much say that she looks very puzzled and as if she does not recognize the man that she has been married to for 12 years. But she will go with the police, but she has them wait while she takes her sweet time going back up to her hotel room, changing into a nice little evening gown, and then leaving. Which I just found to be a nice little dramatic tidbit. So they take the train back to London, and the station is packed. Everybody wants to get a glimpse of Mrs. Christie, the woman who has been missing for 10 days while the entire world watched. She's pretty much shielded from the press and even the police, and it ends up being Archie that is the only kind of liaison, the only person that really talks to the cops. According to Archie, Agatha went to a bunch of different doctors after this to get tested, and the general consensus was that she was suffering from psychogenic amnesia because she can't remember anything from December 3rd to December 14th. Psychogenic amnesia comes from a traumatic event or a mental break, and it can cause amnesia or memory loss, which is a proven thing. Let me tell you, it is a real thing. What's so interesting to me, though, is while I was looking at this, the New York Times article in 1926 said that the explanation was, quote unquote, generally expected memory loss, as if amnesia was just like a common thing in the 20s. I don't know. The New York Times seemed to think that that was like, oh, obviously she forgot 10 days of her life. Yeah. Okay, next story. I don't know. The 20s are wild. The 20s are wild. And once that comes out, the press are kind of done. The thrill of the chase is over. So they kind of leave Agatha alone, and with Agatha coming back, there's no reason to prosecute anybody. So everyone just kind of goes back to their normal business. 2 years later, our girl Agatha does actually divorce from Archie, and Archie goes on to marry his mistress and goes off, does his thing. Whatever. She kind of has her like eat, pray, love moment. She is still writing a ton, but she's also traveling, and she's going all over, kind of bopping around all the Mediterranean. And during her travels, she runs into an archaeologist named Max Mallowan. And they get married. They're married for 46 years. And she travels with him on all of his digs. She just kind of sees the world and seems to have a pretty great life after that. But one thing in her life that she never speaks of is that 10-day bubble. Because she never talked about it, it's still pretty much unsolved. And so I'm going to share some of the most popular theories of what happened to Agatha in those 10 days. I'm going to start with the one that has the least amount of fuel behind it. I think it's a little bit silly, but it's the theory that Agatha Christie's house was haunted. According to the New York Times article, the paper claimed that Christie had been spooked by her own house. It stands in a lonely lane, unlit at night, which has a reputation of being haunted. The lane has been the scene of a murder of a woman and the suicide of a man. And apparently, she once told her friend that, quote, "If I do not leave Sunningdale soon, Sunningdale will be the end of me." And again, there was that rumor of the secretary's letter saying that she, had to leave Sunningdale. So that's one theory. I think it has, 0% weight, but moral of the story is that it could always be ghosts. It could always be ghosts. So this is one of the popular theories from the time, and it still is currently, that this was actually a publicity stunt for her new novel. And so in 1926, in between the time of her mother's death and Archie asking for a divorce, in June, she published The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And this was a groundbreaking crime novel. I can see, if you stretch the imagination, I can see why people like this theory, because it is very meta. The book is narrated by a man who is telling us about this investigation into his friend who was murdered. And this is a Hercule Poirot detective story. The very twist at the end is that we realize that the narrator is the one who killed our victim. The fact that you had this unreliable narrator that is suddenly the murderer in the murder mystery, people were shook. So people are comparing this story style to Christie's Disappearance. I don't know. I think her secretary, all of her friends have come out and said she's really not that kind of person. And also all of her books were so successful anyway. So I personally, this theory to me seems like a hell of a lot of work. She had a 7-year-old daughter. I'm not a fan of this theory, but it still is a very popular one. The next theory, which is similar to the publicity stunt, is that she is our original Gone Girl. And yes, Gone Girl, Gillian Flynn is pretty openly a fan of Agatha Christie. I think any thriller writer kind of has to be. So Gone Girl can very easily be compared to Agatha's 10-day disappearance. And I'm actually going to link an article down below that compares it kind of side by side, the plot. It's very interesting and I highly recommend it. But basically the idea is she wanted to humiliate her cheating husband. One important tidbit that does come up to support this theory is that Agatha was known for talking to her sister, saying that she could, quote, "I could disappear if I wished, and said about it carefully." So she's clearly pondered this before. And also Teresa Neal, that nice South African lady that was staying at the hotel that ended up being Agatha Christie. The name Teresa Neal is one that Archie said Agatha and him we don't know anybody by that name. I don't know where she pulled that name out from. Teresa Neal is Archie's mistress. She also posted a notice in the newspaper saying that relatives of Teresa Neal could contact her at this hotel. She was, whatever was going on with her, she was conscious enough to make that decision. Agatha, that was a choice. That is the big old Gone Girl theory, which, to be honest, it holds weight. It holds weight. Some people, however, go as far as to say she was going to fake her own death and frame her husband for it. I don't think we can go that far, because why would she take her husband's mistress's name as her new identity? And also, why would she give up this life? I don't know. Again, she has a daughter. I don't think so. I think this was just a little public shaming, if anything, which brings us to what I think might be the most reasonable theory, which is the amnesia and a possible, either like a kind of mental break or a suicide attempt. So as far as the psychogenic amnesia goes, she just went through losing her mother. She had to go away to recuperate from this depression, and she immediately comes home to her husband asking for a divorce. She also is in the public eye. She has suddenly become this very famous figure, and I feel like you can't go through anything privately. You can't deal with your own issues privately when you reach a certain amount of notoriety. So that just must have been terrifying for her, and just hard in general, like regardless of what happened in the 10 days. 1926 was not a good year for Agatha. She did speak of this incident only once, 2 years afterwards, and this was to the Daily Mail. And so I don't know the Daily Mail's reputation in the 1920s. This would be 1928. But this is what apparently Agatha said, talking about this urge to drive herself into that chalk pit. And this is describing earlier that day. There came into my mind the thought of driving into it. However, as my daughter was with me in the car, I dismissed the idea at once. That night, I felt terribly miserable. I felt that I could go on no longer. I left home that night in a state of high nervous strain with the intention of doing something desperate. ... When I reached a point in the road which I thought was near the quarry, I turned the car off the road down the hill towards it. I left the wheel and let the car run. The car struck something with a jerk and pulled up suddenly. I was flung against the steering wheel and my head hit something. Up until this moment, I was Mrs. Christie, implying that when she hit her head, she forgot who she was and forgot everything. And so she suffered a concussion, and it resulted in this kind of out-of-body amnesia experience. The only issue I have with this is that if we look at her brother-in-law's letter, she somehow, in this concussed state, made it to London, wrote a letter, and mailed it to her brother-in-law, telling him her intention of where she was going, and then she continues to go there, signs her name in as her husband's mistress, and kind of like chills for 9 days. And so I don't really know how this amnesia might work. Like, maybe she was consciously making all of these decisions, but then she eventually kind of forgot them, whether it was like the shock of seeing her husband, or I don't even know. But what I'm saying is that the theories, all of them, kind of have a little hole. I mean, if you look at anything too closely, it would have a hole. But it still just isn't quite clear what was Agatha doing in those 10 days. You can watch the Doctor Who episode about it and find out what Doctor Who thinks, or you can also watch, there is a movie out, which I will link below, I am blanking on the name, that proposes that she ran off and she was actually busy solving a mystery, a real one. She also, I forgot to mention this, as far as the kind of suicide attempt goes, she had a large bag of money with her. She had like a money belt, just like packed with hundreds of pounds. And I just wonder if you were thinking those thoughts, would you bring all of that stuff and all of your money with you? Who knows? I mean, it could have very easily been that she was just thinking of running away, going for a drive, and it just hit her very suddenly and she veered off the road. Who knows And her autobiography, which was published posthumously in 1977, she doesn't mention it. There is not lickety split. There is nothing about her disappearance. Those 10 days of her life are never touched on. However, I actually didn't know this. I learned this researching this, but she wrote a book called Unfinished Portrait under a pseudonym. As I mentioned, she wrote like romance novels under another name, and this was one of them. And apparently it is considered to be semi-autobiographical because it is about a woman whose husband is cheating on her and wants a divorce. So she goes to a resort and contemplates suicide, and then she meets this man who talks to her and I guess makes her think that life is potentially worth living. So that's kind of our only clue as to what was going on in Agatha's head that day. But regardless of what she was doing, whether it was a publicity stunt, whether it was revenge, whether it was an attempt at her life, she was not in a good mental state that day. And I am personally very happy that she survived and she was able to get back into writing and changing the world of crime novels. She was able to see her daughter grow up. She was able to get married to a man that she loved for a very long time. She was able to see the world, and she was made a dame. Gosh darn it. So those are my final thoughts, and I think it's almost, I don't know, it's very Agatha Christie to leave us with endless solved mysteries, mysteries that are solved in ways that you just would never think. I'm always wrong. When that's the thing, is like when you start an Agatha Christie novel, you think that you know who did it, and you're always wrong. I think that she gave us so many twist endings and these kind of like, whoa, satisfying endings to her books. I think it's appropriate that she leave us with one kind of unsolved mystery. She kept one for herself. So anyway, I just wanted to share that very interesting moment in time about an author that I really like. I will leave you here. I need to drink my very cold tea now. And I will see you guys next week. Bye.